Create an e-commerce React application with database integration completely from scratch. Make sure that Node.js and npm are successfully installed. All of the links for necessary installations and the source code will be available down in the description. Back in VS Code, you're going to want to make sure that you leave your server and Mongo database connected here. You don't want to close out of this. Next, we want to open a new command prompt in our terminal, and we're going to be using Yarn to create this React app. If you don't have it installed already, go ahead and use npm install-g for a global install and Yarn, and then go ahead and hit enter. But for us, we already have this installed, and to make sure that you have it installed, use yarn version and then go ahead and hit enter, and if it's installed, it will show you the version here. Next, we're going to use yarn create, and then we're going to use Vite to create this React application. And then next, we want to specify the name of our directory that we want to create for the front end, and we'll call this front end here. And then we need to specify --template and then React. So we create a React application here. Now you guys will see that our front end is created with all the necessary files for React. And just to be sure here, what we want to do is cd into our front end. And then we want to run yarn install just to make sure everything's installed successfully, and it will install all the dependencies if they weren't already installed already. And you guys are going to notice that it's showing a warning for ESLint. So what we need to do to fix this, and you can do this to fix any warnings that you might have, is say yarn outdated, and it will show us all of our outdated dependencies once this successfully runs, and it will show us that ESLint is outdated here. And to fix this, we want to use yarn to upgrade ESLint to the latest version. And we want to make sure this remains a dev dependency and hit enter. And this will go ahead and run it and update our dependency here. And if we run yarn outdated again, you guys will notice that the warning for ESLint is now gone. And now we need to add a couple of things. So we'll say yarn add React router DOM, and this is going to be to create multiple pages for our web application. And then we also need to install our .env dependency. Go ahead and hit enter and make sure these are both successfully installed in your package.json underneath dependencies. Now, if we navigate into our front end folder here, you guys will see our structure. And just to help out, I'm going to go ahead and close up the backend folder. If we open src within front end, you guys are going to see our app.jsx and our main.jsx. So the way this works is everything is going to render to our index.html here, which is pulling our main.jsx, and then in our main.jsx, it is pulling our app.jsx here. So basically everything from our app.jsx is rendered into our main and then eventually rendered in our index.html page. So to open this up, we can use yarn, and we're going to run our development environment here. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. That will give us a URL where we can open our application. Your locally hosted web application is up and running, and all the default Vite and React code is displaying on the front end here. And all this code that you're seeing right now is coming directly from our app.jsx right in here. So what we want to do first is go ahead and remove all of this, and we'll leave our opening and closing tags here because those are essential to make sure this works. And then back in our main.jsx, we don't need to change anything here, so leave this alone. But in our index.css, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the styling here. And in our app.css, I'll also remove all of the styling here. And throughout today's video, I'm not going to go into detail on the styling for each and every component. I will copy and paste it in, and all that styling will be available in the GitHub link in the description. And now you guys can see, since we removed everything from our app.jsx here, it's not rendering anything front end anymore. And we can also get rid of this use state, and we don't need our React logo or Vite logo anymore, so we can delete that as well. Now I want to go ahead and create the first component today. So inside of our src folder, I want to right click new folder and call this folder components. Inside of our component folder, I want to again create another folder, and this one I will call home, and this is going to serve as our home page component here. Once I create this, I want to create a new file in here called home.jsx. Go ahead and hit enter, and then I want to create one more file here called home.css. And when I go into my home.jsx, you're going to notice that it's blank. To create a boilerplate here, I want to use RAFCE. Go ahead and hit enter, and that will create our boilerplate. But keep in mind, when you do that, it's not going to import your styling. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and import your styling, and you can do that using import, and then we just want to import /home.css. And from here, you can see we have a div with the text home, but it's not displaying on our front end here. So what we need to do is import that into our app.jsx. And we are already exporting our home component here, so we don't need to worry about creating that export. So what I'll do is navigate back to the app.jsx, and what we need to do here is use import again. We want to import our home component from our ./components folder, and then we need to go into our home directory and get our home.jsx, and you will see VS Code help me out a little bit there. And now to actually use this, I can go back into the return state of my functional component in React here, and I can go ahead and use it like an HTML element. And these are self-closing, so you don't need to have another closing tag at the end. Now you guys can see over here in our application, home is rendering from our home.jsx page here because we have the text home within a div. But you guys can see it takes too long creating components by scratch like that. So what we're going to do is go into our front end directory and create a new file, and we're going to call this create-component.cjs. And CJS is just going to specify that it's part of the common module here. And then within this file, I'm going to go ahead and paste this code. Again, all of this will be available in the GitHub link down below. But basically what this code does is it does everything that we just did to create our home component, but we only have to run one line in our command prompt. And so we can actually run this file here. We want to go to our package.json, navigate to where it says scripts, and at the bottom here, we want to create a new script called create component. And when we run create component, we want to use Node to run the script that we created. And now what I can do is open a new command prompt, cd back into the front end here. And now to create components, I can just say yarn create-component because we are going to use this script to run this portion here with Node. And then I can just specify the name of the component. So here I'm going to create the cart component, and I can hit enter. And now within our components, you guys can see that our cart is here. And again, we need to make sure that we import this into our app.jsx to successfully render it. So what we can do here is just add another import like we did with home, but now we need to specify from cart like so. Then once we have this successfully imported, we can again just use this like an HTML element here. And keep in mind, the code that we're using here is not technically HTML. It's extremely similar, but it is technically JSX, which is React specific here. So now you guys can see that home is rendering and our cart page is also successfully rendering. Now what we want to do here is use our home component as one page and our cart component as the second page in our e-commerce application. So what we need to do is import three things, and what we need to import is going to be route, and then we also need browser router, and these are all going to come from React Router DOM, which we installed as a dependency earlier on. Again, if you don't have React Router DOM installed, you want to make sure that you install it as a dependency in your package.json here. And from here, we can start using React Router DOM to create what is going to appear like different pages. And what we need to do is use our browser router first, and this one's going to have a closing tag. Then we need to use our routes here, and again, this one is also going to have a closing tag. And then we can specify our first route, which is not going to have a closing tag. It's going to be self-closing here. And we need to specify a path, and this is going to be our home page. So the path we want to specify is just a slash like so React knows that this is our home page route. And then we need to say what element we want to use. So we'll say element, and we'll make this equal to curly braces, and we can simply cut our home component from here with Control X, paste it here, and that will be our first route. And then for our second route, we can just simply copy and paste this down below. And instead of slash, we want this to be slash cart, and then we want this to render our cart component. So we'll specify it like so here. And then if nothing is showing up on your page, what you want to do is go ahead and refresh it like I just did. And you guys are going to notice that it defaults to our home component, because again, we specified that this is our main page by using our path here. Now, before we move on to the next step, I'm going to go ahead and import my styling for the index.css and app.css. Again, the source code will be below. And if you need more help on styling for React, I have a video where I go more in depth. I'll leave a link up top and down below for you guys. So now I have my styling for my index.css and app.css successfully added, but you're not going to really see any major changes yet because we haven't really created much. What I need to do now is create another component, and this is going to be the component that we use as our navigation. So I'll again use yarn create component, and I'll call this my nav bar. And now you guys will see that our nav bar component is here. What we need to do is go ahead and import this into our app.jsx. So again, I'll go here and use import. I want to import the nav bar, and then from here, it's just going to be the same as what we have been doing. Go into the components, and I accidentally messed this up. So make sure you import these correctly, and I need to import the nav bar. And now, since we want the nav bar to render on every single page without having to repeat our code, what we can do is keep it outside of our routes here, but keep it within the browser router. So what I want to do here is add the nav bar component like so. And that ensures that this nav bar will appear on every single page without us having to repeat any code. Now back in the navbar.jsx, I want to go ahead and import one thing from React Router DOM. And this is specifically going to be our link, so we can link to our different components. So this again needs to come from React Router DOM. What I want to do is get rid of all of this code here, and I'll go ahead and create a header element followed by a nav element followed by a div with a class of nav-child. And here I want to use that link element that I just created, and inside of the first link tag I want to specify to. So I want to go to my home page, and the path that we created for the home page is simply a slash. And then at this point, I'm going to use a Font Awesome icon. So what I want to do is navigate to the Font Awesome 6 CDN. I like to use this website here. Again, this will be available down below for you guys. Copy the link tag, and what I can do is just go ahead and import this directly into the index.html inside of the head, just like a normal HTML page. And then from there, I can go back to the nav bar and I can successfully use my Font Awesome icon here like so, and you guys will see it rendering up top like that. Next, I want to create an H2 element, and our website is going to be called Terrible Teas. And now notice how this is different from normal HTML. You need to use class name for your classes and not just the standard class that you would use in HTML. And now we want to have one more of these divs, so we'll copy this, paste it down below, and we can change our link here to our cart page. And we simply want to get rid of this H2 and then replace our icon here with our shopping cart like so. And you guys will see all of that rendering. And now I'm going to go ahead and import my styling for the nav bar. Now you guys can see that the nav bar is successfully displaying, and you're going to notice that if I click on this link here, I'm going to stay just at localhost. But if I click on the cart, you guys will see that I navigate to the cart page here, and then I can go back again to the home page like so here. Now that we have our navigation set up and ready to go, what we need to do is create a new folder within our SRC, and we're going to call this hooks. Inside of this directory, what we need to do is create a new file called useproducts.js, and in this file we're going to use it to create a custom hook to fetch the database information from our backend. So what we want to do here is start off with RAFCE, and we don't need to import React here. What we need to do is import useState and useEffect, because those are built-in React hooks that we're going to be using here. Within our useProducts here, we're going to create what's called a state in React, and this is going to take two items within array brackets. First is going to be the state variable. We're going to call that products. You guys can call this whatever you want. And then we're going to set our state function, which is going to be called set products. And we need to make this equal to our use state. And inside of this use state is where we can initialize the value of our products state variable. So if I put 1 here, this value is going to start off as 1. But in our case, we want to initialize it as an empty array. Next, we're going to create a use effect, and inside of this use effect, we're going to pass a callback function where we are going to fetch the data from the database. And here we're going to create a function called fetch products. And this is going to be an asynchronous function, so I'll specify async here. If you want to learn more about that, I have a video, leave a link up top and down below for you guys. We don't need to pass any parameters into this, so we'll leave that blank. And inside of this function, we want to use a try. Inside of this try, we'll create a variable called response, and we're going to use await, and we want to await the information coming from our database, and we want to get that information using fetch. And here we need to specify where we want to get this from. So we're going to get this from our locally hosted server. So I'll specify localhost, and then since we started this server on port 4000 in our backend, we need to specify that here. And we're already connected to our database from our backend, so we just need to select what collection we want to get. So we'll specify our products collection here. Now I need to create a variable called data, and again I want to use await, and here I want to await the response, but I also want to turn this into a JSON. And then from here I can call the set products state function to set the variable here to the data coming from my backend using my data variable. Now I need to set up a catch, and I want to pass my error into this catch, and this is only going to run if we have an issue getting any information from our database here. So inside of this, it's essential that we console.error, and we want to say there's an error fetching products, and then we want to display our error. Underneath this, we want to call our function, so we'll say fetch products here, and this is called like a normal function. And then between the curly brace and the parenthesis, we need to tell this use effect when it needs to run. So we'll include a comma, and since we only need this to run one time when our application renders, we'll use empty brackets here, like an empty array. And instead of returning this div, what we want to do is return our products, which again is going to be this variable here, which is now storing all the information from our database. Now I can go back to my app.jsx, and I can successfully import this into my app.jsx using just the normal imports again, and I want to import my use products, and you'll see Visual Studio Code help me out by getting it from my hooks and then use products here. And what I need to do now is go down here within the functional component, create a variable called products, and make this equal to the use products, which is getting the information from our database. Now I need to create a new state here, and this is going to be cart for our variable and set cart for our function. And we want to make this equal to, again, our use state, but this time we want to pass in a callback function for our use state. We want to create a variable called saved cart, make that equal to local storage, because that's where we're going to be storing all of the information on the front end. And we want to get an item from our local storage, and we want to specifically get our cart. Now we want to return a conditional statement, so we want to see if our saved cart is true, meaning is something in our cart. So if there's something in our cart, we want to use JSON and we want to parse the saved cart. But if there's nothing inside of our cart, what we want to do is initialize our cart local storage as an empty array. Next, we need to create another use effect, pass a new callback function to this effect. And here's where we're going to actually set an item in our local storage. So we'll say local storage.set item. We want to set a new item in our cart local storage. And then we need to say JSON dot stringify, and we want to stringify our cart state variable from here. Now we need to tell this use effect when we want it to run. So down here we'll do the same thing like we did in our custom hook, but what we need to do is say every time the cart changes, we want this use effect to run. So every time this variable value changes, we will run this use effect. Now we need to create a function called add to cart so we can add items to the cart. And here we're going to pass in a parameter of product. And then we need to see if our item is already in the cart. So we'll use an if statement. We want to use our cart variable, and we need to use our sum method. Inside of this method, we'll create a callback function passing a cart item parameter. And we want to see if our cart item dot underscore ID is equal to the product dot underscore ID. So what this is doing is it's going through our cart and it's seeing if we have an item in the cart with an ID that is equal to the new product that we're trying to add. And if that is the case, we want to alert the user and say item is already in your cart. But if it's not already in the cart, we need to add it. So we'll use an else statement, use our alert again, and then we want to tell the user item added to cart. And then we actually need to add it to the cart using our set cart state function. And we want to pass an array to this, and we need to include any values that are already in our cart local storage. So we'll use the spread operator followed by cart, and then we need to add a new object. So we'll create that object, add all the values from the product that we need to add, and we need to initialize a quantity of 1. Now that we have all our functionality for our shopping page set up, what we need to do is pass all of this information into our home component using properties. So first we want to have a products property, and this products property is going to store the products variable from here. So remember, when you're dealing with properties, this first one here is simply the property name, and this one is the value. And we also need to pass the add to cart function. So we'll create an add to cart property, and we want to pass our add to cart function. Now we can navigate to our home.jsx, and here you're going to notice that we're just rendering home. What we need to do is make sure that we open our terminal back up, and we need to create a new component. But this component is going to be called products. So we'll go ahead and use our script again, yarn create component, and create products this time. Go ahead and hit enter. And once that completes, we can go ahead and import this into our home component. So I'll import products from, and we need to go outside of this folder, so we'll use 2 dots, go into our products and get the products component. And now here within the return statement inside of this div, we'll get rid of the home text and we want to render our products. Now what we need to do is make sure that we include our properties that we're passing from our app.jsx into our home component here within the functional component. So I'll say products and add to cart. And these are the property names, and I'm getting them directly from down here of products and add to cart and making sure that they are included here. And I'm not actually going to use these in the home page. What I need to do is pass them into my products component. So I'll create another property here and pass in the products again. And we also want to do it again for add to cart. So I'll create another property and say add to cart here. Now again, I need to include all of these properties in my products component. So I'll go ahead and copy this from our home component, go into our products.jsx and go ahead and paste this. And at this point, I'm also going to add the styling in my products.css. Back in the products.css, I want to get rid of this h1, create a new h1, and I want to include a class of shop header here, and this is simply going to say shop. Now I want to create another div with a class of product-grid, and now I want to dynamically render all the products from the database on the front end. So what I need to do is, one, I want to make sure that I'm on my shop page, and you guys can see that because shop will display. And then I want to use my products property, and again, this is all the information from the database being passed down from our app.jsx. And what I need to do is use the map method to map through all of this information, and I'm going to specify a callback function with a parameter of product. And since we're using a map here, we're not going to use curly braces. What we need to use here are going to be normal parentheses, only because we're using a map. And here I can create a div with a class of product, and inside of this opening div tag here, I want to create a key because we need a custom key for each product. To make sure each key for each product is unique, we want to use our product._ID, and again, this is coming from our database. Next, I want to create a div with a class of image container, and inside of this I want an image element, and to dynamically render each image for each product I want to use this same syntax again that I used for the key. Go ahead and paste it for the src, make sure you have the closing bracket here, and instead of saying ID I want to say image URL, and then from here I can just go ahead and copy this and paste it in for the alternative text, and I need to change this to alt. And now you guys can see that all 3 of my images are dynamically rendering coming from the backend database. Next, I want an h3 element, and inside of this h3, I want to display the product name, which you guys can now see for each product. Then I want a paragraph element, display the description this time instead of the image. You guys can see the description now. Then I need to display the price. So I'll say product.price, and then I also want to use my toFixed method here, which is going to tell it how many decimal places I want. And in our case, I want 2 decimal places, so I'll include 2. And you guys can see it's showing our decimal amounts. And we also want to display this with a $sign, so we can just come in here and add a $sign manually. Now I need to create a button with an add to cart class, and this needs to have the text add to cart. And you guys will see that my buttons display for each one. And within this opening button tag here, I want to add an on-click event listener. And inside of this, I need to include a callback function. And I want to run the add to cart function. And I need to pass in the new product. And this is going to be specific for each button. It's going to correlate to its respective product. And then sometimes when you guys are setting this up, you'll run into some issues. If you do, make sure you go ahead and refresh your page and everything will display correctly. Sometimes it just has a hard time in localhost if you don't refresh it. And now once I go ahead and click add to cart, it's going to say item added to cart. And if I click it again, it'll say item is already in your cart because I've already added it. What we need to do now is add some dynamic functionality to our cart icon up here so we can see exactly how many products are in our cart currently. So what I need to do is go back to the app.jsx, navigate to my navbar component, and I want to pass a cart items property to this. And what I need to do is pass in the cart state function from here. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and shrink down my terminal so I have more space to work, but we will need that back in a second. Once I pass this to my navbar component, I need to go to my navbar.jsx and make sure I pass it in here as a property. Now, just before our shopping cart icon in our navbar.jsx, I want to use the cart items property. I want to see if the length is greater than 0. And I'm going to use my AND operator to run code if this is true, meaning that we have items in our cart. We want to display a paragraph element with a class name of item count. And then we simply need to dynamically render the cart items dot length here. And now you guys can see, since we already added one item to the cart here, it will display 1. But if we have nothing in our cart, it will not display at all. Now that we have our shopping page and our home page set up here, along with our dynamic navigation bar, what we can do is go back to our app.jsx and we need to start setting up the functionality for our cart page, because if we go to our cart right now, it's just blank. So to start, I want to go underneath the add to cart function, create a new function called remove from cart, and I want to pass in a parameter called product ID. And inside of here, I want to call the setCartState function, create a callback function with a parameter of previous cart. Then I want to use this parameter and the filter method, pass in another callback function with a parameter of item. And I want to check if the item ID is not equal to the product ID. And this is going to help us remove an item from the cart once we set up the on-click event listener in our cart page, which we will do in a second. Next, I'm going to create a new function called calculate total price, because we need to be able to calculate the total price based on how many products and the quantity of each product we have. This, I'm not going to pass any parameters, but I want to return something here. So I'll return, and I want to use the cart state variable, and I want to use the reduce method, which is basically going to act as a loop to loop over everything in our cart. And I need to create a callback function here where I pass total and item as parameters. And from here, I need to use the total parameter, and I need to add the item dot price, and I'm also going to include a default value of 0 just in case. And then I need to multiply by the item dot quantity, and I want to set this to a default value of 1. And you guys are going to see that I'm running into an error here because I accidentally made these curly braces when they need to be normal parentheses. So I'll go ahead and change that, and then we need to include 0 at the end of this. Next, I'm going to create a function called handle quantity change. And this is going to handle when we change the quantity that we want of a product in our cart page. And we need to pass two parameters here, the first being product ID, and the second is going to be new quantity. And here we can call our setCartState function again, pass in a callback function with a parameter of previous cart, and I want to use this parameter and I want to map through it. So this is going to be the cart that we currently have. And inside of the map, I want to map through each item, and I need to check if the item._id is equal to the product ID. If this statement is true, we want to add a new object by spreading out all the information from our item, and we need to update the quantity of it to the new quantity that we selected. And if the statement we created is false, we just want to return the original item because we don't want to make any changes. Now, once again, we need to pass these as properties, but this time we want to pass them to our cart. And we also need to pass in our cart as a property. So we'll create our cart property and pass our cart variable. Next, we need to create a remove from cart property and make this equal to our remove from cart function. And then we need to do the same thing for our calculate total price. So we'll create a property, make that equal to our calculate total price function, followed by our handle quantity change. So we'll use this as a property and make this equal to our handle quantity change function. Now we need to make sure that we add all of these properties into our cart.jsx inside of this parentheses here. So we'll include our cart, remove from cart, calculate total price, and handle quantity change. And before we set up our cart.jsx component here, what we need to do is create two more components. The first is going to be cart items. The second is going to be cart pricing. Now that we have those set up, we need to import those components into our cart component here. So we'll start off by importing our cart items from our cart items folder and getting our cart items JSX, and then we can just copy this, paste it down below, and change this from cart items for each one to cart pricing. Now to this div here, I want to add a class name of cart section. You guys can see that adjusts our title here. Create a div with a class of row. And here we want to start using our cart items component. And what we need to do here is pass all the necessary properties that we will use in our cart items component. And to make this faster, we're just going to go back to our app.jsx and just copy all of this so we don't have to rewrite any of this. Go back to our cart.jsx and just paste it in right here. And then below this, what we will do is also render our cart pricing component here. And then calculate total pricing is not going to be used in our cart items. So we will pass this in as a property to our cart pricing where it needs to be. And now I'm going to shrink this down because that's going to be all the components that we'll have in today's video. But one more thing we need to do inside of our cart JSX is we need to import the link from React Router DOM, because here we want to have a link. So we'll go ahead and use that. And this needs to go to our home page specifically. So we'll specify that with a slash, and then this is going to just be continue shopping. And now we need to make sure that we pass in all our properties to our cart items component. So we'll just copy everything there and go into our cart items.jsx and paste it. And the only one we don't need is going to be our calculate total price here. So we can delete that. Now we can start setting up this component, and we'll just get rid of all of this, create a new div with a class of cart items. And then we want to conditionally render all of our items. So what we want to do is create curly braces, and we need to check if our cart.length is equal to 0. What we need to do is use our parentheses, and we need to display an H2 that says your cart is empty. And then here we want to use our colon. So if this is not true, meaning there's something inside of our cart, we want to use our cart variable, and we need to map through it. And inside of this callback function, we want an item parameter and an index parameter. Keep in mind, since we're using map here, you want to make sure that you just use normal parentheses. And inside of here, we need to create a div with a class product in cart, and for each product it needs to have a unique key value, so we'll just make this equal to the index. Create another div with a class of product in cart left. We want to include an image element here, and at this point we want to start dynamically rendering information. So what we want to do is use our item.image URL. So this is extremely similar to how we rendered everything onto our products page, but now we want to render it onto our cart page if we have it selected. And for our alt, we want to say item.alt. And now you guys are going to see that I'm having an error here, and it's because I made the mistake of not adding my properties to this component inside of curly braces. So if I go ahead and add them as curly braces, you guys will see it show up correctly now. And at this point, I'm also going to import my styling. Underneath the image, I want to create a div with a class of product info, create two paragraph elements here. And the first one is going to be the item. And here we want to display the name of the item. So I'll copy this, paste it down here and say item.name. And then in this one, I want to display the SKU, so I'll go ahead and paste this again, change image URL to item.sku. Now underneath this div, I want to create another one with a class of product in cart right. Create a div in here, a paragraph element that specifies each, and a div with a class of price. And here I want to display the price as a dollar format, and I want to simply say item.price, and then I want to use two fixed again to display two decimal places here. Underneath this div, I want to create another one with the class quantity. Here I want to create a label element with a text of quantity here. And for our HTML4, we want to pass in curly braces, and we want to use our backticks, and we want to say quantity dash our item dot underscore ID, and keep in mind this $ will not display since we're using it inside of backticks. Now we need to create a select element. The name will be quantity. The ID will be what the HTML4 up here is, so we can just copy that, paste it here. And then we want to have a value equal to item dot quantity. And now before we move on to this next portion, what we need to do is create a function within our cart items component. So we'll go back up here before the return statement, and we need to create a function called handle change. And inside of this function, we need to pass our event object and our item as parameters. And here is where we're going to call our handle quantity change function, and we need to pass in our item dot underscore ID, and we want to use parse int. We want to use this on our event object dot target dot value. Now we can go back down here to our select element and use our onChange event listener and make this equal to a callback function. And what we need to do is pass our event here as a parameter, and we want to call our handle change function and pass in as arguments our event object and our item. And within this select element, we want to have 4 options. So we want 1, 2, 3, and 4 for how many products that you want, and you can add more or less for your application here. Underneath this div, I want to include my font awesome icon of X, and here I want to pass an on-click event listener as a property, pass in a callback function, and I simply want to use the remove from cart, and I want to remove the specific item ID. So I'll go item dot underscore ID. So now that I have this all set up, if I go over here, I can change the quantity of this item that I want. And if I hit the X, you guys will see that it goes back to your cart is empty. And I can go back to the shopping page, re-add this item back to the cart, and it will redisplay here. Now let's go back to our cart.jsx, and again, you want to make sure that you already passed your calculate total price function to your cart pricing component here. And then I can navigate to my cart pricing.css and import my styling. Inside of my cart pricing JSX, I want to make sure that I pass in the calculate total pricing property. And before I start creating the elements within the return statement, I want to create a variable called subtotal and make this equal to calculate total pricing function. Create another variable called tax, and this is going to be equal to our subtotal, and we want to multiply it by 0.09, which is a standard tax rate of 9%. Create one more variable called total, make this equal to subtotal plus our tax value. Now inside of the return statement, I'm going to remove all of that, create a new div with a class of pricing container, create an h3 where it says order summary, create a div with a class of subtotal, and here I can create an h3 that says subtotal colon followed by a div where I want to go ahead and dynamically render as dollar format the subtotal value. So I'll say subtotal, and then again I want to use toFix to display 2 decimal places. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this one down below, and for this one, this is going to be shipping. Change this from subtotal to estimated shipping, and we don't need to render anything here because it's always going to be free. Then I can copy this, again, paste it below my shipping, change this to tax, say estimated tax, and this variable here, I can just change that to tax. Then one more time, I want to copy this, paste it down below, change this to total, change this to estimated total, and then I want this to render my total variable here. So now you guys can see based on whatever I have added to my cart, I have a subtotal without tax, the estimated tax, and then both of those added together for your estimated total. Next, I want to create a button with a class checkout-btn, and I just want to include the text checkout. Now you guys have all the code set up and ready to go. What you want to do to make sure you test this correctly is go delete all your browsing data, because you want to completely remove anything that was saved to your local storage in your browser. Go back to this, go ahead and refresh. You're going to see that it renders your cart is empty when there's nothing here, and everything defaults to 0. But if I go back to the home page with all of our products, you're going to see our products render from our backend database, and I can add this one, and I want to add the third one to make sure all of them work, and then go through each one and make sure it says item is already in your cart, like so here. And then go ahead and navigate to your cart. You guys will see 3 products here with all their necessary values, and it will render the subtotal, tax, and estimated total based on whatever you have in your cart. And we can also change the quantities here. So if I want to change this to 2, it will dynamically change all of our total values over here as well. And I can always go ahead and change this back to 1 if I want, and then I can delete every single one of these products, and it will say your cart is empty and display all of our necessary pricing here. Tap here to see what happens next.